In 1984, deep in the outskirts of northwestern Montana, 68-year-old Nora Henderson believed she knew that frozen brook better than anyone. She had crossed it every winter since her 20s, back when her knees didn't complain and the cold felt sharp instead of heavy. That morning looked harmless, just a thin layer of fresh snow, soft light, no wind, the kind of winter silence that feels deeper than any sound. Nora had her old trail dog beside her, Buck, 15 years old, half deaf, loyal to a fault. She only wanted a short walk before warming the cabin stove, but 50 meters before the familiar crossing point, Buck stopped. No growl, no movement, just a stiff, frozen posture aimed at the tree line. Nora sighed. "Come on, boy. What now?" Buck didn't blink. She stepped on the ice the same way she had for decades, tapping once, shifting her weight, trusting memory more than caution. It felt solid. On her third step, she heard something almost too soft to register. Not the clean snap of breaking ice, but a deep hollow shift from somewhere below the frozen surface. Then Buck barked, one sharp, explosive warning, and the ice moved. It didn't collapse, it slid. Two plates shifted apart beneath her weight like the jaws of something old waking up. Her right leg plunged into freezing black water, wedged instantly between two sheets that slammed back together with the force of the current. The cold hit like a fist. Her breath vanished in a cloud of white, and the ice locked around her calf like a trap. Buck kept barking, but not at her. He faced the trees, tail stiff, fur raised. Nora turned her head just enough to see it, a lone wolf in the shadows, still as stone, watching. In that moment she understood. She wasn't just stuck in the ice. She was being studied by something that knew winter better than she ever would. Stories like this travel far, sometimes farther than the footsteps of the people who lived them. Tell me, from which city are you listening, and what time is it where you are? I want to know how far this one reaches. People who grow old in the northern states learn something younger folks often forget. Winter is a living force. It doesn't roar like a storm or blaze like a fire. It waits. It shapes the land quietly. And if you misjudge it for even a moment, it reminds you who's in charge. Nora Henderson had lived long enough to respect that. At 68, she wasn't fragile, just careful. She'd spent half her life on that stretch of Montana forest, long before paved roads and vacation cabins arrived. Back then, it was only ranchers, trappers, and people who preferred silence over neighbors. Nora thrived in it. She liked the slow rhythm, the cold mornings, the freedom of letting Buck roam without a leash. Her body wasn't the same as it had been, of course. The stiffness in her right hip, the lingering ache in her left ankle from an old fall. These were reminders that age doesn't ask for permission, but none of it stopped her. It just made her choose her steps with more intention. That winter had been mild, almost suspiciously so. The nights were cold, but the days climbed above freezing more often than usual. Every rancher she knew talked about how the ground didn't seem to set properly. Streams froze thinner, snow melted too fast, tracks blurred and refroze, impossible to read. Nora noticed it too, but didn't think much of it. She trusted her memory. She knew every bend of that brook, every rock under its surface, every spot where the ice held strong even in warm spells. Buck trusted her, and she trusted the dog's instinct. Together they had crossed that same frozen ribbon of water for decades without incident. But on that morning, something subtle had changed. Not in the ice, but in the air. A heaviness, a silence too deep, like the woods were listening. Nora should have paused. Buck certainly tried to warn her. She just didn't know yet what they were walking toward. For a moment, Nora thought the sound she'd heard was only in her head. Then the ice squeezed tighter around her leg, and the cold shoved any doubt out of her mind. Her right foot was somewhere below the surface, jammed between two slabs of ice that had slid together like the jaws of a trap. She couldn't see it, only the black seam where the brook ran fast underneath and the white ghosts of her breath lifting into the still air. Her hands were the only reason she wasn't in deeper. Fingers spread on the rough surface, she held herself up with the kind of strength you don't think about until your life depends on it. "Okay," she whispered, more breath than voice. "Okay, Nora, think." The cold didn't wait for her to collect herself. It climbed her leg in slow, greedy inches. Her boot had filled the instant the ice closed. Now the water ate through her sock, her skin, her joints. The pain was so sharp it felt almost hot. She stared down at the narrow crack, trying to picture the brook below. In summer it barely reached her knees. In winter it was a different animal. Buck's bark snapped the world back into focus. The old dog was behind her left shoulder, paws scraping for balance, chest rumbling. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the trees beyond the bank, on the grey shape half melted into the shadows. The wolf hadn't moved much. It stood with its head low, breath barely visible. Snow clung to its fur. It was just watching, waiting. "Not you," Nora muttered. "I don't have time for you." Her first instinct was to yank straight up. The instant she did, fire exploded from her ankle to her hip. The ice didn't budge. Her leg stayed locked where it was, and the shock left her lightheaded. For a second, the forest blurred. Trees, sky, breath, all smearing together into white and grey. She forced herself back down before she slipped forward. All right, not brute force. Nora shifted her weight onto her elbows, bringing her chest a little higher. The ice under her forearms creaked, a thin, brittle sound that made every muscle in her body freeze. One wrong movement and the crack beneath her could widen. If that happened, both legs would be in the water. "How deep are you?" she murmured, staring into the slit. The brook answered only with a low, muffled rush. She slid her right hand down toward the crack, feeling along the edge where the surface vanished into black. The water burned through her glove. Her fingertips met the underside of the ice, slick and uneven. She searched for anything she could use. A notch, a ridge, a weak point. Nothing. Just smooth, uncaring cold. Buck barked again, closer to her ear. She felt the vibration of it through the ice. "Easy, boy," she said, eyes still on the seam. "I see him." She didn't look at the wolf. One threat at a time. If she didn't get free, the animal wouldn't have to decide anything. It would just wait. Her mind tried to wander into useless questions. What if no one came by the trail today? What if this was where they found her? If anyone found her at all? She shut that door hard. Her daughter was 2 states away. The nearest neighbor was more than a mile by an unplowed road. Nora had chosen this life for the silence and the independence. This was the cost. She pressed her chest higher and reached sideways with her free hand, feeling for the branch she'd noticed near the bank when she and Buck first stepped onto the ice. Her shoulder complained. She ignored it. Her glove brushed wood, then closed around a thin stick. Too light, too dry, but it was something. She brought it back and eased it into the water alongside her trapped leg, guiding the tip toward the point where the 2 plates met. The current tugged at it, trying to drag it deeper. She wedged it into the seam and pushed sideways. The stick flexed. Then it snapped. A crack of wood, a small groan from the ice, her own breath catching in her throat. For a moment she thought she'd doomed herself to plunge forward, but the ice held, trembling under her weight and then settling again. Buck's bark changed, shorter, sharper. Nora lifted her head despite herself. The wolf had shifted to a clearer gap between the trees. It hadn't come closer, but now its eyes were obvious, pale, steady, measuring. She knew they almost never risked attacking a standing human, especially with a dog nearby. But she didn't look like a standing human. From the animal's point of view, she was already halfway down. Her right foot began to prickle, then fade. The pain turned dull at the edges. That scared her more than the sharpness had. "Not today," she rasped. "Buck," she whispered. "Here." The dog hesitated, caught between his instinct to guard the tree line and the pull of her voice. Then he shuffled forward until his flank pressed against her upper arm. He was old, yes, but still warm. His body heat seeped through her jacket sleeve, a stubborn patch of life against the frozen air. "Good boy," she said. "Stay with me." She leaned into that warmth for a few breaths, then refocused. If she couldn't force the plates apart, maybe she could work with the shape of the crack itself. Her ankle wasn't a perfect cylinder. If she turned it, very slowly, maybe the thinnest part would find the thinnest space. "Turn the key," she murmured. "You're the key." She braced both palms on the ice and began to twist her upper body a fraction toward the bank. The movement pulled at her leg, a sick dragging inside the joint. Pain surged, and the ice voiced its complaint in a fine white fracture near her left elbow. She stopped, counted 3 slow breaths, listening for anything worse. Nothing. Just the brook below and Buck's breathing above. She moved another fraction. Her fingers had gone completely numb. She could no longer feel the ice, only pressure. She tucked one hand briefly beneath her chest, against her own ribs and Buck's shoulder, trying to coax sensation back. Then she set it down again before she slipped. "Don't you dare fall asleep," she told herself. "Not here." Time thinned into a string of small decisions. Twist a little, breathe, listen for cracks, keep Buck close, don't look at the wolf too long. At some point the animal sat down, tail curled around its paws, like something settling in for a long wait. It wasn't going anywhere. Nora pushed into the twist again, using what she had left in her arms and core. Something inside her knee ground in a way that didn't belong to ice or water. Tears burned and froze at the corners of her eyes. And then, almost too small to notice, her foot shifted. It was no more than the scrape of fabric against ice, the faintest upward drag, but she felt it. The plates above groaned, adjusting a hair's breadth. The crack didn't split wider. It didn't close tighter. It breathed. Nora exhaled a tremor she hadn't realized she was holding. "That's it," she whispered. "You give me that much, I'll take more." Buck barked with renewed fury, as if he understood. The wolf lifted its head, ears pricking at the sound. The cold was still pushing deeper into her muscles. Her body was still 68 and tired and mortal, but her leg could move. That was enough to mean one thing. The story, whatever it turned into, wasn't finished yet. Nora didn't remember choosing to move. Her body simply did, as if some old survival script had risen from a deeper layer within her. The moment she felt that tiny shift in her foot during the last attempt, something in her chest stirred awake. The cold hadn't won yet, not completely, and as long as she could still command her leg even a little, she had leverage. Not much, but enough to build on. Buck barked again, sharp and ragged. His paws scraped on the ice, slipping slightly as he tried to stay braced between her and the wolf. Nora didn't dare look back yet. She couldn't afford to break her concentration. Not now. Not when she had finally found the rhythm her body needed. Her arms trembled violently with every breath, but she pushed through it, repositioning her hands on the ice to anchor herself better. Her knee screamed when she twisted again. The sound tore out of her throat without permission, a thin, aching gasp that she clamped down quickly. The wolf would hear it. Pain carried differently in winter air. Beautifully, clearly. She couldn't sound weak. She wouldn't give the animal one more reason to linger. She inhaled freezing air that stabbed at her lungs and pushed, turning her upper body just a fraction more. The ice around her calf shifted, barely, but she felt it. The plates groaned in a long, low complaint, then settled again. Her leg dragged upward another half-inch. The sensation was sharp and electric, a tearing heat that shot up her thigh. "Come on, come on," she whispered, voice raw. Her fingers dug into the ice for balance. They weren't fingers anymore, not in the useful sense. They were stiff shapes at the ends of her arms, wooden and slow, responding seconds late to her intentions. Every time she planted her palm, she couldn't be sure if it would hold, whether her grip would slip, whether her weight would send her forward into the water still churning beneath the ice. Buck growled, low, constant, not the bark of a dog warning something to keep its distance. The growl of an animal sensing something approaching its line. Nora didn't want to know what the wolf was doing. She didn't need that distraction, but she had to be aware enough to react if things suddenly shifted. She breathed out slowly, steadying herself against Buck's flank. His warmth was fading, her body was too cold to absorb it well, but he stayed pressed to her side, trembling. "Good boy," she murmured again. "You stay with me, just a little more." She twisted her waist a few degrees further, guiding her trapped leg into that sliver of openness she'd felt before. A tiny pop echoed inside her ankle, like a joint shifting under strain. The sensation was horrible, but the movement that followed wasn't. Her foot rose another inch, then the ice tightened again. Nora nearly slammed her fist down in frustration. Damn it! She froze, breath held, listening. The ice around her groaned again, but didn't give way. The crack didn't widen. It didn't swallow her whole. Not yet. She let out a trembling breath. "All right," she whispered. "You're going to fight me. Fine. I'll fight back." The wind picked up. Just a whisper, but it carried the deep cold of January across the open stretch of the brook. It brushed against her wet pant leg, and the cold stabbed deeper, straight through to bone. She shuddered. Her muscles flickered between cramping and going limp. She didn't have much time. She knew it. She pressed her palms into the ice and shifted backward, trying to lift her hips. The surface complained, hairline fractures forming around her forearms. She ignored the warning, focusing on the sensation inside her trapped leg. Her foot had turned slightly when she rotated her torso. Maybe if she rotated it further. She twisted her hip, slowly, painfully, lining her ankle with the narrowest part of the seam. Her breath came fast and shallow. Her arms felt like rope fraying at the ends. Buck barked, snapping at the air toward the trees. Then it happened. Her leg moved. Not a slip, not a micro shift. Actual movement. Her foot rose an inch, then two. The ice resisted, then relented. Her calf scraped against the underside of the plate, skin burning from cold and friction. Then her boot broke free. She gasped. The sound ripped from deep inside her. She almost slid forward into the crack as the sudden release threw off her balance, but she caught herself, elbows locking in one final act of defiance against the ice. Her leg was free. She yanked it upward, dragging it onto the surface with both hands. The pain was instant and brutal. Her foot was barely a foot anymore. She couldn't feel anything except the vague awareness of weight. Her muscles seized, spasming from the extreme cold. She curled her leg toward her body, hugging it close, trying to trap whatever warmth she still had. Buck turned and licked her face, whining high and desperate. Nora wasn't out of danger, not even close. But the moment she'd felt her foot break free, she knew something vital. She wasn't dying on that brook. Not today. She eased herself backward inch by inch, dragging her numb leg behind her. Every movement shifted the ice. Every shift made her breath catch. The wolf didn't move, but every time she glanced over her shoulder, she saw it adjusting its posture. Head lower, weight shifting forward, eyes following her with careful, impossible patience. "Buck," she whispered. "Stay close." She didn't dare stand. Not yet. Her leg wouldn't support her. She needed to reach the bank, just 10 feet behind her. 10 feet of unstable ice. 10 feet with a wolf watching. Her gloves were soaked and starting to freeze stiff. She used her forearms instead, dragging herself backward, pushing with her left heel. Her right boot, soaked and rigid, knocked uselessly against the surface. She gritted her teeth and kept going. Each push made her lungs burn. The air felt thinner with every breath. The cold gnawed at her back, her fingers, her cheeks. Her body screamed to stop, to rest, just for a moment. She didn't stop. She couldn't. Halfway to the bank, she had to pause. Her vision blurred. The cold inside her leg pulsed like something alive. She lifted her head just enough to find the wolf again. It had moved. Only a few steps. Still far, still quiet. But closer. Buck's bark came out broken, almost a cough. The old dog's legs shook from effort, from fear, from exhaustion. He stepped over her, placing himself between Nora and the wolf again. "Good boy," she said. The words cracked in her throat. "You're doing good." She pushed again, forcing her numb body to obey. Her coat scraped against the ice. Her elbows burned. Her breath came in raw bursts of steam. She dragged herself the last few feet until her glove finally touched frozen grass. The bank. Her body nearly collapsed on the spot. She slid the rest of the way off the ice and onto solid ground, curling around her frozen leg and gasping through the shock of warmth trying to return. The wolf stood at the edge of the trees, not crossing the line where ice met land. Its breath rose in slow plumes. Its eyes stayed locked on her. Not today, Nora thought again, but now the words were less defiance and more gratitude. Buck pressed against her, shivering, waiting for her next move. Nora didn't know how she'd stand or how she'd walk or how she'd make it back to the cabin, but she knew she could try. And trying, at her age, mattered. Trying meant she wasn't done yet. Everyone has one thing that keeps them going, even when the body says stop. What's yours? The first few seconds on solid ground felt almost worse than the ice itself. Pain surged through Nora's leg in wild, stabbing flickers as sensation tried to return. It wasn't warmth, not really. It was something harsher, a deep bone ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she clutched her thigh, half curled in the snow, letting the worst of the shock pass through her like a storm front. Buck paced in a tight circle beside her, whining low and broken. His tail was stiff, his ears pinned halfway back. He kept darting glances toward the tree line, then back at her face, then toward the trees again. Age had slowed him, but instinct hadn't left him. He knew the danger wasn't gone, only shifted shape. "Easy," Nora whispered. though she wasn't sure if she meant the dog or herself. "We're not out of this, but we're off the ice, that's something." She forced her trembling hands to reach down and touch her boot. It was stiff, frozen solid in places, waterlogged in others. She tested her toes inside. Nothing. She squeezed harder. Still nothing. That wasn't good. She swallowed hard, pushing down the fear growing in her chest. She had to get her circulation moving. She didn't have long. The early stages of hypothermia were already creeping in, making the edges of her vision fuzz and her hearing feel hollow. She needed to stand, needed to move. Even crawling would help, but staying here was death. She rolled onto her left side, trying to coax her right leg into a position that didn't send lightning up her hip. The cold had stiffened everything, tendons, muscle. Even the skin felt wooden. She gritted her teeth and forced her knee to bend. The pain was sharp enough to steal her breath for a moment, but it bent. That meant she still had control. "Come on," she murmured. "One thing at a time." Buck moved closer, pressing his head under her arm, as if offering himself as a brace. Nora almost laughed, a broken, exhausted sound, but she took the help. She got her palms into the snow, planted her left knee and pushed. The world tilted. Her leg folded, useless for the moment, and she fell back to the ground with a heavy thud. Snow puffed around her face. She lay there, breathing hard, swallowing down the rising panic. The wolf hadn't moved yet. She could feel its eyes even when she didn't look. She couldn't afford to collapse here. She couldn't ask Buck to defend her in the state he was in. If the wolf decided to close the distance, she needed to be upright. She tried again. Elbow down, knee planted, hips shifting forward. The cold bit into her hands, even through the gloves, but she used it. Let it remind her she wasn't frozen yet. She pushed up with her left leg, dragging the right into a position where it could at least trail behind her. The world steadied. Buck stayed pressed to her side, anchoring her. She got to her feet, barely, wobbling, shaking violently, but she was standing. The wolf stepped forward, only a foot or two, but enough to make her heart spike. It wasn't charging, just adjusting its distance, its interest. Winter predators were efficient. They didn't rush. They conserved energy. They watched for the moment when effort would be minimal and reward would be guaranteed. Nora straightened as much as her spine would allow. She forced her shoulders back. Even in pain, even trembling, she needed to look larger than she felt. Needed to give the wolf a picture it wouldn't want to test. "Not today," she said again. Her voice cracked on the last word. "I'm still here." The cabin was maybe half a mile away, though distance in cold always felt longer. She could picture it. The old wood stove, the emergency blankets, the metal kettle she could fill with snow to melt. But half a mile in this state felt like a long and fragile prayer. She tested her right foot on the ground. It didn't respond normally. She felt pressure, but nothing like strength. Still, it held enough weight to keep her upright for a second, then two. "Good enough," she whispered. She took her first step. It wasn't a step so much as a half slide, half stumble, but she stayed upright. Buck walked at her side, his flank brushing her calf, guiding her forward. He glanced back at the wolf only once, then faced ahead. Even he knew that the only way out was forward. The forest didn't offer much mercy. The snow was uneven, and every dip twisted her foot slightly, sending spikes up her shin. Her breath grew shallow as the cold worked into her core. She pulled her jacket tighter, knowing it was useless. The insulation was compromised from when she fell on the ice. But familiarity mattered. Routine mattered. Acting like she wasn't dying helped her body believe it. Step, drag, step, drag. The rhythm was slow, painful, but steady. Each minute she remained upright increased her chances. Her arms shook under their own weight. Her right leg occasionally buckled, and she had to stop, brace on Buck, and breathe through the pain. The wolf followed. Not close, not even threatening, just present, a ghost on the snow, a reminder that nature didn't punish or pity, it simply observed. Once, when her foot slipped and she cried out, despite trying not to, the wolf lifted its head. Its ears pricked forward. Buck snarled, a deep, surprising sound for such an old dog, and Nora steadied herself before the wolf could interpret the stumble as anything more. "Still here," she muttered again. "Still fighting." The trees thickened as she moved, giving her patches of relief from the wind, but also making each step heavier, each obstacle more significant. Fallen branches blocked her way. Uneven mounds of snow forced her to lift her right leg, something it resisted with every ounce of stiffness it could muster. Her breaths came out in wet, hoarse bursts. The cold inside her boot had turned from pain to heaviness, a dangerous sign. She rubbed her thigh through her coat every few steps, trying to keep blood moving. The motion helped, but only slightly. Finally, through the trees, she saw it, the faint outline of the roof of her cabin. Relief hit her so hard her knees nearly gave out. Not yet, she warned herself. Don't collapse yet. The cabin wasn't close enough to crawl. She needed a few more dozen yards of strength. I see it, Buck, she whispered. We're getting there. The dog gave a short, exhausted bark, as if echoing her hope. The wolf stopped when the cabin came into view, not at the porch or the clearing, but at the tree line, as if some unseen boundary held it there. It paced once, then twice. Buck bristled, stepping between her and the animal again. But the wolf didn't cross. Nora kept moving. Her hands shook as she reached the last stretch. Her right leg dragged, almost dead weight now, barely responding. Buck pushed his shoulder under her palm, helping her stay balanced. She leaned heavily on him, trusting him with the last pieces of strength she had left. She reached the porch step and nearly collapsed onto it. The wood felt warmer than the snow, absurd but true. She gripped the railing and let Buck climb first. He turned back and whined, urging her on. One more, she whispered. Just one more step. She pulled herself up onto the porch, half falling against the door. Her fingers fumbled at the handle. It slipped twice before she managed to twist it open. Warmth didn't greet her, but shelter did, and that was enough. She stumbled inside, dragging her frozen leg over the threshold. Buck followed immediately, nudging her shoulder with his nose. The door swung shut behind them. Nora leaned against it, letting her head fall back, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like something fighting to stay alive. Outside, the wolf lingered for one last moment before fading back into the trees. She wasn't safe yet. Not from the cold, not from the damage to her leg, not from what would come next, but she was inside. She had survived the ice, and she wasn't done fighting. The cabin door clicked shut behind her with a dull wooden thump, and for a moment Nora simply stood there, or leaned there, her back pressed to the panels, breath trembling in and out of her chest. The air inside wasn't warm, not by a long shot. She hadn't stoked the stove since early morning, and the winter cold seeped through every crack in the old boards. But compared to the punishing wind and the icy water she'd just escaped, it felt like stepping into another world. Buck circled her legs once, limping on stiff joints, then settled beside her right foot, whining softly as he nudged her boot with his nose. Nora swallowed hard. I know, she whispered. I know it's bad. Her leg felt heavier by the second. The transition from ice to shelter had triggered the stage she feared most, the body's delayed response to trauma. She reached down, running stiff fingers over the soaked, frozen pant leg. The fabric crackled. The boot was the worst of it. Water had filled it to the top. The outer leather had hardened into something closer to stone. She needed it off. She also needed heat, water, a blanket, a place to sit where she wouldn't collapse sideways and smash her head on the floorboards. She pushed off the door and nearly fell. Her right leg buckled, sending a jolt of pain through her thigh. Buck barked once, startled, alarmed, and tried to help by pressing his side under her palm. Easy, she muttered, steadying herself on the small table by the door. One thing at a time, girl. She half-hopped, half-dragged herself to the wood stove. The metal was stone cold, dark with soot. She grabbed the small crate of kindling, hands shaking too violently to hold the pieces properly, and dumped them inside. A matchbook sat on the shelf. She reached for it, fumbled it, nearly cried in frustration as it slipped from her numb fingers onto the floor. Buck nudged her hand, licking her knuckles as if reminding her to stay present. Nora bent down slowly, painfully, and retrieved the matchbook between two stiff fingers. She struck the first match. It snapped. The second one fizzled to nothing. Her heart hammered in her throat as she lit the third. Please, just light. The flame caught. Her breath hitched in a half-sob as she touched it to the kindling. Smoke curled upward. A faint orange glow filled the metal belly of the stove. Good, good, she murmured. The fire grew, catching smaller twigs, then the thicker sticks she'd stacked earlier in the week. When it finally crackled into something steady, the kind that promised real heat. Nora slumped onto the old chair beside the stove, her entire body shaking from cold and exhaustion. But she wasn't done. Not even close. She lifted her right leg with both hands and set her foot on the chair in front of her. The boot was frozen to her sock. She tugged gently. The pain was immediate, sharp, blooming up through her calf. She hissed, biting down hard on the inside of her cheek. Tears stung her eyes. "No choice," she whispered. She worked the boot slowly, inch by inch, trying not to tear skin. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy, but she managed to unbuckle the top strap with the last bit of dexterity she had left. The leather peeled back, cracking as it bent, and finally the boot slid off with a sickening suction sound. Nora stared at her foot, pale, swollen, patches of skin mottled in worrying shades. Not black, thank God, but close, too close. She rubbed it gently, wincing at the lack of sensation. She couldn't feel her toes at all. That frightened her more than any glimpse of the wolf had. "Stay with me," she murmured to her own limb, as if coaxing a stubborn child. "You've got work to do yet." Buck lay down with a heavy thud beside her, front paws stretched toward her leg, as if trying to warm it himself. Nora rested a hand on his head, grateful for the comfort. Outside, the wind shifted. A faint crunch of snow carried through the wall. Nora froze. Buck's ears twitched, his head lifted. A low growl rose from deep in his chest. The wolf had followed. Of course it had. It had watched her struggle across the last stretch of forest. It had seen her collapse onto the porch. Predators didn't chase when energy was scarce. They tracked. They waited. They let nature finish the job. Nora leaned forward just enough to peek through the small window beside the stove. At first, she saw nothing but the blurred white of wind-tossed snow. Then she saw it, a shape at the edge of the clearing. Not moving, not approaching, just standing, head low, ears forward, tail still, watching the cabin, watching her. Her breath fogged the glass. She closed her eyes briefly. "I'm not dead," she whispered. "Not yet. Not tonight." She forced herself back into the chair, pulling her foot closer to the rising warmth of the stove. The warmth hurt, fiercely. It stabbed at her toes, then at the arch of her foot, then deeper. She clenched her jaw and breathed through it, knowing the burn meant circulation was fighting its way back. Her leg ached all the way up to the hip. She reached for the blanket draped over the couch and pulled it onto her lap, wrapping her frozen thigh and calf. She massaged the muscles with both hands until they ached from effort. Buck rested his head on her knee, eyes flicking between her face and the window. "You and me both, old boy," she whispered. "We're not going down in front of him." Minutes passed. 10, maybe 20. Time had no sharp edges now, only a slow, heavy flow. The fire grew hotter. The air inside the cabin lost its brittle edge. Nora's shaking eased gradually, though the exhaustion behind it deepened. Her eyelids drooped. Her breathing slowed. She forced herself to stand. The moment her foot touched the floor, she gasped. It wasn't ready. The nerves were waking up in chaotic waves, firing pain signals in every direction. She held the table to steady herself, breathing in short bursts until her leg steadied. She walked, slowly. Step, drag, step. She checked the water bucket. Empty. Damn. Melt snow. It was the only option. She scooped a potful, set it on the stove, and watched as the flakes collapsed into liquid. Her vision wavered, not dangerously, but enough to make her sit again. She sipped the warm water slowly, letting it thaw her throat and settle her heartbeat. The wolf stayed at the tree line. She could see it each time she glanced at the window, watching, assessing, waiting. Nora wasn't afraid anymore, not in the same way as before. Fear had burned away, replaced by something older, steadier, a clarity that came from near death and near survival mingling together. "I'm not your meal," she whispered toward the cold glass. "Not today," Buck growled in agreement, though he was too tired to stand. As the water warmed her core and the fire breathed new life into her limbs, Nora's mind sharpened. She replayed every moment on the ice, every inch she'd gained. Every second Buck had held the line between her and the wolf. She wasn't safe yet. Frostbite was still a threat. Her ankle might be damaged, and she didn't know how long the wolf would linger. But she was alive. Alive and thinking. Alive and fighting. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If the cold had wanted her, It should have taken her on that brook. Inside this cabin, with Buck beside her, and the fire roaring back to life, Winter would have to try harder. The fire had settled into a steady, confident burn by the time Nora felt her heartbeat return to something close to normal. Not warm, not comfortable, nothing about her body felt that, but stable. She could sit upright without shaking. She could feel her foot again, although the feeling was a wild mix of tingling heat, deep ache and patches of numbness that scared her more than she wanted to admit. Buck slept beside the stove, breathing in slow, tired grunts. Every now and then his ears twitched, alert even in rest, still listening for something out there in the cold. Nora turned her head toward the window. The wolf remained at the tree line, head low, tail still, the same quiet patience it had held out on the ice. She didn't know if wolves felt curiosity or something colder, simpler, instinct waiting for weakness, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Nora understood the rules now. The wolf wasn't approaching. It was assessing, waiting, and waiting was something Nora could use. She pushed herself up from the chair. Her right leg protested immediately, buckling slightly. She caught herself on the stove, steadying her breath. The pain was different now, less sharp, deeper, a soreness rooted in cold-damaged muscle and strain. She could work with that. Pain meant life, meant circulation. It meant the worst hadn't happened. Her jacket, still damp from the fall, needed to dry. She hung it near the stove on the back of a wooden chair. Steam rose from it in faint, wavering ribbons. She drank another small sip of warm water. She knew she couldn't drink too fast. Her stomach was as cold as her skin. Slow warming, steady warming. That was the key. She reached for the emergency kit under the sink. A small metal box she kept for sprains, cuts, or the occasional burn from the stove. Inside, she found an old roll of bandage and a tin of ointment. She didn't have the luxury of treating frostbite properly, but she could wrap her ankle to keep swelling down and protect her skin. The simple act of bending forward made her vision swim. She leaned back, breathing through the dizziness, then tried again, slowly this time. "Easy," she murmured. "You're not 20 anymore." She chuckled, a dry little sound, then sucked in a breath as her fingers brushed a particularly tender patch on her foot. It was mottled pink and white, but not black, not dead. She wrapped it carefully, tucking the bandage tight against the warmth of the blanket. Her body ached from the inside out, but she was thinking clearly now, planning. The cabin wouldn't protect her forever. If the wolf was hungry enough or bold enough, it might test the door. And while Nora trusted the wood she'd reinforced over the years, she also knew predators didn't give up easily. She needed a signal, something that told the wolf that the cabin, her, wasn't worth the trouble. She scanned the room, eyes landing on the lantern hanging beside the window. A simple metal thing half full of fuel. She grabbed it, wincing as her toes complained under the sudden shift of weight. Buck lifted his head, blinking sleep from his eyes. "It's all right," she told him. "Just making sure we get to sunrise." She walked slowly, painfully, down to the window and held the lantern up near the glass. The wolf's eyes caught the light, reflecting back with a dull, eerie shine. Nora set the lantern down on the inner sill and lit it. The flame flickered, then steadied into a warm, stubborn glow. She turned the wick higher until the glass heated and the light stretched farther across the clearing. The wolf took a step back. Not far, not a retreat, but a slight, cautious shift. "Good," she whispered. "You keep your distance." Buck let out a low rumble and rested his head on her foot. Nora reached down and stroked his ears. "You saved me out there," she said quietly. "You knew before I did." Her voice cracked. She hadn't let herself feel the weight of the morning yet. The ice, the pain, the wolf, the slow, brutal crawl back to the cabin. Now that she was finally safe enough to think, the emotions seeped through, sharp and unexpected. Gratitude, fear, pride, exhaustion. She blinked fast and straightened. She couldn't afford to drift. She walked the short length of the cabin 3 times, slow, dragging steps, to force warm blood back into her muscles. She rubbed her arms, her legs, pacing the way she had after her ankle injury a decade earlier. After the 3rd round, she felt steadier, not strong, but capable. Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying fresh snow across the clearing. The wolf turned its head slightly at the gust, then lowered it again. Hours stretched in silence. Nora dozed in the chair with Buck's head resting on her boot, But each time she woke, the wolf was still there, still watching, still waiting. She forced herself awake fully when the fire dipped low, adding more wood with stiff fingers. The heat was stronger now, radiating into her bones. Her skin tingled in uneven patches, painful but promising. Just till dawn, she told herself. Just stay awake till dawn. Time trickled by in an uneven stream of exhaustion and awareness. The pain in her leg dulled to a deep, throbbing ache. Her toes alternated between burning and numb. She flexed them every few minutes, checking for responses. Buck snored lightly, tail twitching. A faint grey light began to bleed into the sky. Nora went still, mourning. She forced herself up, leaning heavily on the table as she staggered to the window. The clearing was empty. The wolf was gone. She exhaled, long and shaky. Relief washed through her body in warm waves, warmer than the fire, warmer than the blanket. A relief that felt earned. "Thank God," she whispered. She looked down at Buck. The old dog stretched awkwardly, then pressed his muzzle into her thigh, tail wagging once. Nora knelt, slowly, wincing, and wrapped her arms around him. His fur was warm, steady, alive. "We made it," she murmured. "You and me, old boy. We made it." Her breath trembled out of her. Her body hurt everywhere. Her leg felt like it had aged 20 years in a single morning, but she was alive. She had climbed out of ice that should have taken her. She had walked half-frozen through a forest that wasn't meant for the weak. She had stared down the patient hunger of a winter predator, and now she stood, shivering, aching, exhausted, but standing. The sun rose slowly behind the trees, painting the clearing in pale gold. The first real warmth touched the edges of her face. Nora inhaled deeply, letting that new day settle inside her chest. She had survived the ice. She had survived the cold. She had survived the night. And she wasn't finished yet. Nora didn't go to the hospital that day. She knew she should have. Frostbite wasn't something to take lightly, but she also knew the nearest clinic was more than an hour away, and driving with her ankle the way it was wouldn't have been safe. So she did what she had always done. She handled what she could with the tools she had. She kept the fire alive. She kept moving her toes, even when it hurt. She fed Buck, brushed the snow off his back, and whispered thanks into his fur more times than she could count. By midday, she could walk without Buck bracing her side. By evening, she stepped onto the porch and saw nothing but wind-sculpted snow where the wolf had stood. Some people believe survival is about strength, but Nora had learned something different on that frozen brook. It wasn't strength that had saved her. It was stubbornness. It was memory. It was the quiet understanding that after 68 winters, she had more to fight for than to surrender to. Before going back inside, she looked at the line of trees and whispered, "Not today." Then she closed the door, stoked the fire, and let the warmth settle into her bones. Not as victory, but as proof. Proof that age doesn't end the fight. It only sharpens the reasons to keep going. Before you go, tell me, what's your reason to keep going no matter how hard the cold gets?